Welcome to Peaceful Kitchen's Baby Food Textures class. Once your baby has graduated beyond single ingredient purees, your doctor might give you the okay to start more complex foods like herbs and spices, grains, meats, and dairy. The recipes that we make incorporate all those things, which is a relief because trying to add all those things into a little person's belly can seem overwhelming. I remember when I started cooking at this stage for my son and looking up recipes online, a lot of the things that I saw involved pureeing a combination of chicken and sweet potatoes and apples in a food processor. Totally gross, and I thought to myself, if I'm not going to eat that, why would he? Instead, these recipes are recipes that your entire family can eat. We want you to get into the habit really early on of cooking once for your entire family, and the recipes that we make do just that. Whether you're cooking for yourself and your child, or you also have a 2- or 3-year-old, they can enjoy these recipes too. Today, we're going to make a bunch of different recipes that work our way from smooth to more textured foods. We'll start out with a sweet blueberry and spinach smoothie, then move on to a butternut squash soup with a hint of ginger. Next, we'll make a tarragon chicken and pea risotto, and lastly, we'll make French lentils with quinoa. Your whole family is going to love these recipes, and I can't wait to get started. Let's get cooking. Smoothies can be really simple or really complex. This is a really simple one. It's so simple that I actually make it for my kids every single morning. I love knowing that they're getting a fruit and a vegetable before they start the day. For this recipe, you'll need 1 cup of baby spinach, 1 cup of orange juice, 1 cup of blueberries, and 1 cup of full-fat yogurt. If you're making this for a baby or a toddler, you really want to make sure you use full-fat yogurt because the babies really need that fat for brain development. A lot of people shy away from using berries because berries like strawberries and raspberries can cause a reaction. Blueberries have very low acidity, so it's a really good berry to start with when introducing your child to berries. So to make it, all we do is combine the ingredients in either a food processor or a high-powered blender. So to a food processor, we're going to add 1 cup of spinach, our plain yogurt, and I like to use unsweetened yogurt for this because the berries and the orange juice provide enough sweetness. 1 cup of blueberries, and then I'll put on the lid and slowly stream in the orange juice right through the top. That looks perfect. So from here, you can either pour it into a sippy cup with a straw for your child, or you can even put it in one of those reusable pouch containers. But right now, I'll pour it into a delicious glass and have it for myself. Cheers. Next up, we're going to make a delicious gingered butternut squash soup. I love this recipe if I'm making a butternut squash puree for my child. I can use the leftover butternut squash puree to make a soup for my husband and I. If you don't have leftover butternut squash puree, you can also use butternut squash chunks and let it boil once you add the stock in to soften it before you puree the soup. For this recipe, you'll need garlic, butter, onion, butternut squash puree, chicken stock, and ginger. We're going to start by chopping the onion. We want to chop the onion in a dice, and really the size doesn't matter because at the end we'll puree the soup either using an immersion blender or a food processor, so everything will be smooth. When I dice an onion, what I like to do is cut it in half right through the root, leaving the root intact, and make slices, not quite up to the root. So this way the entire onion stays together when you're ready to dice it. Once you have all your slices in the onion, it makes it really easy to cut into even pieces. When you're cutting an onion, always make sure to leave the front blade of the knife onto the board and move in a forward sweeping motion. Next, we're going to add the butter to the pot. And now we're going to add in our chopped onions. I will say, do not be afraid of butter. In France, French moms use butter in their baby food right from the start. They don't do single ingredient purees. They do green beans with butter, squash with butter. And in this soup, the butter instead of olive oil is going to give it a really rich texture and make it really nice and delicious. We always add the onions in before the garlic because they take longer to cook. Now we'll chop the garlic. We're going to give the garlic a nice big smash to remove it from its peel. We'll place the knife right on top, smash it, And there you go. Peel comes right off. Garlic can go flying in that situation, but that's okay. And from there, we'll chop it up. Now it's ready for the pot. We'll let the garlic and the onion cook until the onion is translucent and the garlic has started to cook through. Once that's happened, give it about 3 minutes. We're gonna add in our butternut squash puree. Next up, we're adding in our butternut squash puree. And if you don't have butternut squash puree, now is also the time where you would add in your chunks of butternut squash. We'll also add in 2 cups of chicken stock, and 2 teaspoons of ginger. When we make baby food, we never ever add in excess salt. Babies' stomachs can't handle the excess sodium. It's really not good for their kidneys, so we like to use different ingredients to help maximize the flavor. One example is stock. When you're buying stock for your child, always make sure to buy low sodium stock. Check the label, you'll see the difference. A regular stock has about 30% of your daily sodium for the day, where a low sodium one has under 5%. Once that's all in, we're gonna bring this to a boil and then let it simmer for about 20 minutes. Next up, we're gonna puree the soup using an immersion blender. If you don't have an immersion blender, that's fine. Simply transfer the soup in batches to either a food processor or a high-powered blender. Just be careful because the soup will be very hot. You'll know the soup is done when there's no chunks of onion left in the soup and it's completely smooth. From there, we can transfer it to a bowl. If you're making this for a child, I would say to serve it at room temperature. For you, you can eat it piping hot. There it is, butternut squash soup. So delicious, so smooth and creamy, a hint of ginger. Your whole family's gonna love this recipe. Best of all, you can freeze it, so if squash isn't in season, you can make it when it is and have it all year long. It'll stay good in the freezer for about 3 months. Now we're really ready to move on to textures. And this lentil and quinoa dish is the perfect start. It's packed with protein, fiber, and nutrients from the quinoa and the lentils, and it has a lot of delicious flavors. For this recipe, you'll need a shallot, red lentils, quinoa, carrots, herbes de Provence, chicken stock, and olive oil. If you don't want to use chicken stock and you want to make this a completely vegetarian dish, you could easily use vegetable stock too. Just like we did with the other recipe, please make sure to buy low sodium. If you change this to vegetable stock, you have a completely vegan dish that's packed with protein and taste. We'll get started by chopping up the shallot. We're going to chop the shallot in the same exact way we would chop an onion. It essentially has the same flavor as an onion, just a little bit more mild. So we'll slice it in half through the root. Then leaving the root intact, we'll make a bunch of slices and also cut it into really small pieces. Next up, we're gonna chop the carrots. We wanna make sure that we're chopping them into really tiny, tiny pieces because although they'll soften in the pot, because we're not pureeing it and because this might be your baby's first taste of textures, we wanna make sure that the pieces are really, really small. I'll show you how we do that. We'll take the carrot and cut it in half, and then we're gonna cut it lengthwise. Then we'll put both flat sides down and make 2 slices down this time. Then from there, you'll have 6 tiny sticks that you can dice. That makes sure the pieces are really, really small. You'll see here how small they are. Whenever I teach this level class, I always say the nickname of this class should be Chop Till You Drop, because you do a lot of chopping. Great. So I've added some olive oil into our pot and turned up the stove to about medium heat. Now I'm adding in the shallots and the carrots. So just like you would when making a soup, you want to make sure that your vegetables in the pot get really nice and soft before you add in the other ingredients. So that'll take probably around 5 minutes for them to cook. Now that the carrots and shallots are nice and soft, we're ready to add our other ingredients. Quinoa, lentils, and we use red lentils here. They're a little bit smaller than the brown or the green ones. And the rumor is that they make your kids a little less gassy, which is good if you have a gassy baby. The herbs, and lastly the stock. We'll give that a quick stir, then we're gonna leave it alone. We'll bring it to a boil. Once it's boiling, we'll lower the heat, cover it, and simmer until all the water is absorbed and the lentils and the quinoa are completely cooked through, around 25 minutes. Our lentils and quinoa are finished, and you know it's done when all of the stock has been completely absorbed, and what you have now is lentils and quinoa that's really nice and soft. It smells delicious. Really delicious, really nice and soft, a really good introduction to textures for a new baby who's not really used to that type of textured food yet. And your whole family is gonna love this, but most importantly, your baby will. Our last recipe is a tarragon chicken and pea risotto. Unlike a traditional risotto where you're kind of slave to the stove, stirring constantly for 30 minutes straight, this is a cheater's version. I know you don't have time to be married to the stove for a half hour. What we'll do is we'll saute an onion in olive oil, add in our rice, and cook it like traditional rice with chicken stock. From there, we'll add our remaining ingredients. For this recipe, you'll need an onion, olive oil, brown rice, boneless, skinless chicken thighs, low-sodium chicken stock, grated Parmesan cheese, and fresh tarragon. You'll also need about 1.5 cups of pea puree, and if you don't have pea puree, you can use regular peas and mash them up with a fork. So we'll start by cutting up the onion. What I love about this recipe, or one of the things I love about this recipe, is that it's really versatile. Instead of tarragon and peas, you could use a combination of basil and tomatoes. Again, we're gonna wanna make sure that we're cutting the onion up really, really small. We're not pureeing this recipe. So you wanna make sure that all the chunks are things that you think your little one can handle. That's done. Now we'll add that to the pot with some olive oil. So we started by adding olive oil to the pot, probably around 2 tablespoons. And now we'll add in our onion. We're gonna let the onion saute until it's soft and translucent, about 5 minutes. And then we'll add in the brown rice. I'm using brown rice in this recipe instead of traditional rice because brown rice contains a lot more nutrients than white rice. Again, we want to make sure that all the dishes that we're making for our children are as nutrient dense as possible, and using brown rice instead of white is just a really simple step to take. So I'll saute the onion for about 5 minutes until it gets nice and soft. Then we'll add the brown rice, and we're just going to stir it around for a minute or two until it gets nice and toasty. That's going to bring out its nutty flavor. Then we're gonna add in the chicken thighs. So here I'm using boneless, skinless chicken thighs, and I always use chicken thighs in recipes that I use, especially when I'm cooking for babies. Thighs have a lot more flavor than the bland, dry, white meat breast that we're used to. Plus, they have a lot more nutrients and fat, which are really important for baby's brain development. Now I'm adding in the chicken stock. I'm gonna bring that to a boil. Then lower the heat, cover, and let it simmer for about 40 minutes until the rice and the chicken are both cooked through. Cooking chicken like this is a method called poaching. The chicken breasts stay nice and moist. There's not going to be any crunchy or hard parts that you would get if you roasted in the oven. That's really, really important if you're cooking for a baby who's not used to maybe hard or textured foods. This is going to keep the chicken nice, moist, and soft and really easy for them to swallow. Now that the rice is completely cooked through, we're going to remove the chicken with tongs and place it on a cutting board to chop it up. A lot of baby food recipes at this stage call for you pureeing chicken in a food processor. If you've ever done that, it's completely disgusting. The smell that comes out of your food processor is awful. I really highly suggest that you take the extra step and chop it up. And we're gonna chop it up really, really small. And then we'll add it back into the pot. So once you think it's chopped up enough, just go over it with a knife one more time. Really make sure you get all those big, big pieces out. Once that's ready, we add it back into our pot. I love recipes like this that are one pot meals. That means less dishes to clean. And this one has so many different elements. It has your grains, it has your dairy, it has a vegetable, it has your meat, all in one meal. It really is a complete meal, all in one pot. So once the chicken's in, we're gonna stir in our remaining ingredients. We'll take our pea puree, our Parmesan cheese, and because we don't use salt in this recipe, Parmesan cheese is a cheat. It gives it a nice salty flavor without adding in table salt. And then lastly, our tarragon. And for this, I'll just take a couple pieces of tarragon and I'm gonna chop it up pretty small. And I'll add it in. And this gives the dish a really nice flavor. From there, all we do is stir it all together and you have a delicious chicken and pea risotto. And wait till you see how pretty it is once it all comes together. So here it is. It's so nice and creamy from the peas and from the Parmesan cheese. You would never know that you hadn't been stirring this for 30 minutes straight. But you've been doing other things. And there you have it. Thank you for joining us at Peaceful Kitchen's Textures class. We hope your little ones and you enjoy all the recipes that we made today. These recipes are ones that your entire family can eat, so it's really time efficient for you when you're cooking in the kitchen. It also gives you the opportunity to be really creative when it comes to introducing new foods, new herbs, and new dinner time options at your table. For more recipes and inspiration, please visit www.peacefulkitchen.com. Thanks for joining us.